Hey, what's up everybody? 8-Bit Flashback here. The best Sega Genesis. Is it Model 1, 2, or 3? In this video, I'll be demonstrating which Sega Genesis model is the best in my opinion. And I will also be demonstrating my favorite plug-and-play options for video, audio, and power on the Sega Genesis. So this is the Sega Genesis Model 1. And here is a different variant of the Model 1. This is the Model 2. And the back one is the Model 3. So out of all of these models, this first one would be my favorite. This Model 1 features a high-definition graphics logo on the front and an external port on the back, which was originally designed for a modem. When a Genesis has these two things, it usually indicates that the console has a different sound chipset that sounds much better than the majority of the other Sega Genesis models, including different variants of the Model 1. So even though these are both Sega Genesis Model 1s, they have very different sound output, and I'll show the difference here in just a few. The Sega Genesis Model 1s do support stereo sound, but only when it's routed through the headphone jack located on the front of the console. And here is the Model 2. Now this does support stereo sound from the rear of the console just using a regular connection, but the sound quality on the Model 2s is not the greatest. Now I have heard a couple reports that there is a couple of variants of the Model 2 that do include a better sound chip set, but those are really hard to come by. And here is the Model 3. Now surprisingly, these have very good sound quality, but unfortunately, it's only mono sound. Now the weird thing about the Model 3s is Sega did not manufacture them. It was a company called Majesco, and because of this, a lot of people feel that the Model 3s are not a real Sega console. As for myself, I have somewhat mixed feelings about the Model 3. I remember purchasing it back in the 90s, and I thought it was a true Sega product, and I very much enjoyed playing a lot of my favorite games on the Model 3. But it does have its cons. No Sega CD, no 32X, no virtual racing. But there is some mods out there that can fix some of these issues. All four of these Genesis consoles are capable of outputting an RGB video signal, so they all have very comparable video quality. What really sets these consoles apart is the sound. Here's a couple examples showing the major differences, and I will start off with the non-high definition graphics Model 1. So at this test here, I'm using the stereo output through the headphone jack, and as you can hear, the sound is just not very clean. And if I turn that volume up, you can really start to hear the distortion in the sound. Next up is the high definition graphics Model 1 that has the better sound quality. The sound is much cleaner, and I can turn that volume all the way up without any distortion. And here is the Model 2 that does feature the stereo output through the back of the console, but the quality is not so good. And here is the Model 3, which might have the cleanest sound out of them all, but no stereo sound and not much bass either. So out of these four consoles, I think the cleanest sound is coming from the Model 3, but the best sound in my opinion is coming from the high definition graphics Model 1, because the sound is still pretty clean, and it's also stereo sound, that produces better bass as well. Now, with all that being said, I have read numerous online sources stating that there is a couple different variants of the non-high definition Model 1s, and a couple Model 2s that have better sound output, but finding these variants is not an easy task. Now let's talk about some of the plug-and-play connections for the best video output. My favorite option would be the HD Retrovision Component Cables, which are compatible with all these Genesis consoles, and even the 32X and Sega CD. These cables harness the native RGB 240p output that the Genesis supplies. My favorite thing about these cables would be the video quality, but they're also extremely easy to use. They truly are plug and play. There's no external power source you gotta mess with and plug in. They're ready to go just the way they are. And they even have a stereo audio input jack, so you can plug in the stereo output from the front of the Genesis Model 1. These cables come stock with a Genesis Model 2 plug, but adapters are available for numerous consoles such as the Genesis Model 1, Sega Saturn, and a few others. Another decent option would be the Hyperkin HD TV cable for the Genesis. These cables are plug and play, but they do require an external power source. And these cables have great compatibility, but they do have some video quality issues such as motion blur. And I did a review for this cable a while back, and I'll make sure to put a link in the description. Another decent option would be a SCART cable. These also utilize the RGB signal from the Genesis, but this cable does require a SCART to HDMI adapter to be plugged into a modern HD TV, and an external power source is needed as well. But out of these options, the HD Retrovision cables are my favorite. And I did compare all three of these cables in a previous video, which will be in the link down below. Now I'd like to do some comparisons of a standard composite cable hooked up to the Genesis versus the HD Retrovision component cables. On the left side of the screen would be the HD Retrovision cable hooked up to a Model 1, and on the right side of the screen would be just standard composite cables hooked up to the same Genesis Model 1. And here is the composite only, and here is the HD Retrovision cable. And here's a little bit of gameplay from Batman Forever for the Sega CD on the Genesis Model 1 with the high definition graphics. As you can see in those comparisons, there's a drastic difference between the composite video cables and the HD Retrovision component cables. And here's an example using composite cables on the non-high definition Sega Genesis Model 1. And here is the Retrovision cables on the same Genesis. And here is the HD Retrovision cables on the Genesis Model 1 with the high definition graphics. And here is the HD Retrovision cables on the Sega Genesis Model 3. And here is the HD Retrovision cables with the Sega Genesis Model 2. The video quality between all four consoles when using the Retrovision cables is very comparable, but I would give just a slight advantage to the Sega Genesis Model 3. It has just slightly sharper graphics, but this just may be the difference in the age of the internal parts between the two. The Model 3 is about 10 years newer. One drawback with pretty much all RGB cables would be the jail bars that are present around the gameplay screen. But pretty much the only way to correct this is to mod the internal RGB components. For my favorite power supply options, I like to use the OEM power supplies that originally came with the consoles. But if I'm using my Genesis console with the Sega 32X or the Sega CD, this can become a power supply nightmare. Back in the day, a separate power supply was required for the Genesis, 32X, and the Sega CD. But now you can purchase one power supply to power all three at the same time. I purchased this one from Retro Game Supply. This is a company that's based in the UK and has tons of various power supplies for various different consoles with very reasonable prices. I got this one shipped to the US for only $30, and that included the shipping. I've had this power supply for about a year or so, and the quality seems to be pretty decent, and I've had no issues with it whatsoever. So this is one power supply that has 3 different cable ends that plug into the Sega 32X, the Sega Genesis, and the Sega CD. As far as my favorite controller goes, I'm a huge fan of the original 3-button controller. I really like the size of this controller and the way it feels when I'm holding it in my hands. The official 6-button controllers that came out later on were a little bit smaller, and the button layout felt quite a bit different. But they do have a purpose because there's a lot of games that make a lot more sense using the 6-button controller. But when I do use a 6-button controller, I prefer to use the original official Sega wireless controllers. These are a little bit bigger and feel more like the original 3-button controllers with a 6-button layout. But of course, these do use the older infrared technology, so line of sight can become an issue. Luckily though, there's a lot of newer options such as the Retrobit 2.4G wireless controllers. But for myself, when using a newer controller, I prefer to use 8BitDo products such as the M30 2.4G wireless controller. This controller works great with no noticeable lag. Okay, it's time for me to go, but I'm going to leave you with a couple different gameplay captures using the Sega Genesis Model 1 with the high definition graphics along with the Retrovision cables. If you like this video, if you could hit that like button and subscribe, and have yourself a great day, and I'll see you next time.